A tormented man is indicted for murdering his wife, but he deems himself innocent as he has no recollection of the grim act. Fred Madison, an LA-based saxophonist, receives a message on his intercom saying that Dick Laurent is dead. Suddenly, he hears a patrol siren, but the street is empty when he checks outside. One morning, his wife Renee notices a mysterious parcel by their front porch. She brings it inside and finds a VHS tape. Fred wonders where it came from, but she's unsure. Therefore, Fred decides they must watch the tape to find out what it's about. Oddly enough, the tape contains a short video featuring their house's exterior. This baffles the couple, but Renee wants to be optimistic, suggesting it must be from a real estate agent. In the evening, Fred thinks back to a memory from one of his performances in a club. Back then, he caught Renee leaving with their acquaintance Andy. He suspects she's cheating behind his back, but he's yet to confront her. Renee arrives in their bedroom, returning Fred to the present. Once she's settled beside him, the couple engages in a night of intimacy. However, Fred fails to satisfy his wife, further contributing to the staleness of their marriage. The following day, Renee receives a parcel containing another tape. Fred puts it on the VHS tape player and invites her to watch it. The video makes their skin crawl as it shows the intimate view of their house's interior. Moreover, there's a scene where the intruder captured a moment where they were sleeping. Terrified for their safety, Renee declares they must call the police. Shortly after, two detectives watch the video, but they can't form a judgment about it yet. Therefore, they inform the couple they'll perform an investigation inside their house. Upon arriving at their bedroom, the detectives learn that the couple originally had two bedrooms, but Fred turned the other into his practice room. Detective Ed asks them if they have a video camera, but Renee denies it. She reveals that Fred hates them. In his defense, Fred likes to remember things his own way, not necessarily how they happened. His response baffles the detectives, but they move on from the topic. This time, Detective Al wonders if they have an alarm system. Renee confirms but admits they haven't been using it lately. Fred clarifies that it kept going off and gave them false alarms before. Still, Detective Al advises they should use it again, especially with their current dilemma. After the brief interrogation, the detectives roam into the couple's house to check if someone tried to break in. When the detectives don't find anything, they simply provide their calling cards to the couple in case something happens. Later that night, the couple attend Andy's house party. A tipsy Renee pleads to Fred to get her a refill of liquor and he complies. Inside the mansion, Fred notices a peculiar-looking man. With a smile, Mystery Man approaches him and informs Fred they've already met. Fred's skeptical about his words, so he asks him where, and the man reminds him they met at his house. Again, Fred doubts his claims, so the man tells him he's actually there as they speak. To prove his point, he urges Fred to call his house's telephone and promises to answer it. Fred complies, and he indeed hears Mystery Man's voice on the other line. Once their conversation's adjourned, an alarmed Fred seeks Andy and asks him about Mystery Man's identity. Though Andy doesn't know his name, he believes the man is Laurent's friend. Fred remembers that the intercom message declared Laurent was dead. He wonders if it's true, but Andy's surprised to hear this. Furthermore, Andy's intrigued that he knows Laurent. Fred reiterates that he doesn't know him. There's a hint of fright in Andy's eyes, for he can't imagine how Laurent can be dead. Hence, he demands on whom he's gathered the information about Laurent's death. Suddenly, Renee interjects and asks Fred who the dead person they're talking about is. Fred declares they'll go home and expresses his regret for attending the party. On their way home, Fred interrogates Renee about how she met Andy. According to her, she met him long ago at a place called Moke's, and he informed her about a job. Fred asks her what kind of job it is, but Renee tells him she's forgotten. Outside their residence, Fred orders Renee to stay in the car as he wants to check if there's an intruder. He doesn't find anyone inside, but he remains uneasy. The next morning, Fred receives a third VHS tape from the mysterious sender. Curious about its content, he views it but finds himself watching a video of him ending Renee's life. Terrified, he tries to call her repeatedly, but she never answers. Instead, he awakens from Detective Al's punch, and the furious man accuses Fred of being a wife killer. Regardless of his allegations, Fred believes he didn't do it. The following day, the guards assist Fred into his cell after the jury finds him guilty of Renee's death. As a consequence, he will be executed by electrocution. During his stay in prison, Fred can't stop himself from remembering the grim video. One day, a doctor administers a sedative to Fred since he's been experiencing an intense headache. Fred reveals he can't sleep at all. Later in the evening, Fred experiences another episode of intense headache. He desperately pleads to the guard to give him an aspirin, but the man refuses. While he endures the pain, he sees a vision of Mystery Man smiling at him until he disappears inside a cabin. All of a sudden, a flash of blue light envelops his cell, and he enters a dreamlike state where he gets a glimpse of a man standing on a highway. In the morning, the authorities discover that Fred is missing in his cell. Rather than him, they come across a 24-year-old delinquent named Pete Dayton inside. Based on the information Warden Clements has gathered, Pete has a previous criminal record for auto theft 5 years ago. Therefore, they're opting to set him free. Upon learning that he still lives with his parents, the authorities summon Candace and Bill Dayton to fetch their son. Though Pete is freed, two detectives, Lou and Hank, keep a low-profile investigation of him. That night, Pete goes to a club with his friends and girlfriend Sheila. While the couple's dancing, Sheila's concerned about what's happened to him, especially since he has a noticeable wound on his forehead. Pete admits he's unsure, causing her to be in disbelief. She voices he's been acting strange lately, especially the other night. Confused, Pete asks what night she's pertaining to, and Sheila reminds him about the night he vanished. Despite her reminder, Pete tells her he doesn't remember it. The couple moves on from the topic and proceeds to enjoy the night. The next day, Pete returns to his workplace, an auto repair shop, to resume his duties. His boss, Arnie, enthusiastically greets him and expresses relief that he's back at work. Again, the detectives have tailed on Pete, keen on keeping their eyes on him. Moments later, Mr. Eddie, a mobster, arrives to seek his favorite mechanic's service. The man notices Pete's wound, so he offers to deal with those who wronged him. Pete appreciates it, but he insists he's fine. Moving on, Pete asks about what service he can provide for the patron, but Mr. Eddie invites him to take a ride. He reasons he hears an unusual sound in his car's engine. On the road, Pete abruptly stops Mr. Eddie and goes out to tighten the engine's bolts. Afterward, he returns to the car and urges the patron to test it. As expected, Pete exceeds Mr. Eddie's expectations, further earning the man's trust. Mr. Eddie takes a detour, but a tailgater ruins their peaceful trip. Out of anger, Mr. Eddie chases the man to teach him a lesson. Once the man's cornered, Mr. Eddie and his goons pull out their guns and confront the irresponsible driver. The scene disturbs Pete, but he simply remains quiet. Back in the auto repair shop, Mr. Eddie pays Pete for his service, and he gladly accepts it. Before he can leave, the patron tries to give him a VHS tape containing an adult film, but Pete declines. The detectives outside are intrigued by Mr. Eddie's presence. Detective Hank wonders if his partner recognizes him, and he confirms. It turns out that Mr. Eddie is Laurent. Later that night, Pete, surprised his injury is already gone. Upon getting dressed, he heads to his girlfriend's residence to invite her for a drive. The couple parks in a secluded area and begins to be intimate. Unbeknownst to the couple, the detectives are tailing them. The following morning, Mr. Eddie returns to the shop with his Cadillac and entrusts the inspection with Pete. Though the mechanic's able to hold a conversation with his patron, Pete can't stop himself from staring at Mr. Eddie's attractive girlfriend. Strangely enough, the woman shares a similar resemblance to Renee. By the evening, the woman visits Pete's workplace and introduces herself as Alice Wakefield. She tries to flirt with him by expressing her desire to have dinner with him. At first, Pete refuses her advances, knowing he already has a girlfriend. But when Alice tells him she'll just go home, he changes his mind and insists she stay. Immediately, the pair heads to a motel to spend a passionate night. The detectives observe him from afar and criticize Pete's womanizing. For the following nights, Pete and Alice secretly meet at a motel to have an affair. One night, Alice calls Pete to cancel their meeting since she has to go somewhere with Mr. Eddie. Then, she warns him the mobster suspects something, so they have to be careful. After their phone call, Pete experiences a hallucination that shows Alice's face. Therefore, he leaves for a motorcycle ride to fetch Sheila. Inside a motel, Pete makes love with her as a way to release his pent-up desire for Alice. Back home, Pete's parents inform him that the police called them to ask if their son has regained his memory of the night he vanished. Still, Pete insists he doesn't remember anything. With his words, his parents reveal that Pete returned home with Sheila from a date. However, there was actually a man accompanying him as well. Pete asks him about the man's identity, but Bill only tells him he's never seen such a man before. Now, Pete becomes alarmed, urging him to press his father about what really happened to him. Sadly, Bill refuses to disclose it. Since his parents aren't helping, Pete tries to remember what happened the other night. A flash of memory appears, wherein Sheila calls his name while his parents run toward him. Apart from this, he sees a brief video scene of Renee's corpse. The next day, Mr. Eddie visits Pete, but he isn't as friendly as before. This time, he indirectly threatens him by saying he'll shoot those who fool around with Alice. Following Pete's interaction with him, Pete meets Alice and the woman plans to run away with him to escape the mobster's control. She suggests they rob her rich acquaintance, Andy, who pays girls to party with him. Upon hearing this, a possessive Pete asks if she's partied with him, but she denies it. She clarifies that it's all part of a deal since Andy works for Mr. Eddie. Her statement confirms the mobster is Laurent, an adult film producer. Curious, Pete wonders how she got entangled with such shady people. Back then, she met Andy at Moke's and he offered her a job. The said job offer led her to meet Mr. Eddie, who threatened to end her life if she refused to submit to his wishes. Pete remains unconvinced, especially since she didn't even try to leave. Hence, he opines that maybe she liked it. Hurt by his assumption, Alice volunteers to leave if he wishes, but Pete stops her. On his return home, an enraged Sheila confronts Pete for his infidelity. When she becomes physical, Bill intervenes and urges her to go home. However, her emotions get the best of her, leading the woman to voice he's different ever since the night of his disappearance. Bill pleads with her not to reveal more information about it, and she complies. With a broken heart, she declares she doesn't care about Pete and leaves. Shortly after, Pete receives a phone call from Mr. Eddie, and the mobster urges Pete to talk to his friend. At the end of the line, Pete hears Mystery Man's voice, and he greets him in a similar way to Fred. During their conversation, Mystery Man cryptically tells him how a person can be executed in the Far East. Now frightened for his life, Pete accepts Alice's proposition of robbing Andy to run away from their situation. The following night, Pete breaks inside Andy's mansion and knocks him unconscious. Just in time, Alice descends the stairs and congratulates him for successfully executing their plan. However, Andy regains consciousness, halting their little celebration. Andy attacks Pete, but he's able to throw him across the room, impaling Andy's head on the glass table. In guilt, Pete asks Alice what they should do, and she answers that they must take all of Andy's precious possessions. While Pete watches her remove Andy's jewelry, he notices an adult film featuring Alice projected on a huge screen. Then, his attention zeroes at a photograph containing both Renee and Alice. Pete asks if the two women are her. With an unbothered expression, Alice simply taps her picture and declares it's her. Suddenly, Pete gets a concerning nosebleed, accompanied by a headache. He inquires about the bathroom's location, and Alice informs him it's upstairs. Upon reaching it, he hallucinates a motel hallway and encounters a devilish Alice having an intimate moment with a different man. Immediately, he closes the door and returns to the living room. Alice points a gun at him, alarming Pete, but she's merely messing around. Eventually, she hands it to him. Afterward, Alice shares that she knows a fence that'll give them money and even passports in exchange for their loot. Sometime after, the couple arrives at a cabin which has appeared in Fred's hallucination. Alice opens the door and comes across an empty room. Left without a choice, she tells Pete they have to wait for the fence. While they're waiting, the couple makes love outside the cabin. All of a sudden, Alice grabs Pete's head and whispers he'll never have her. She proceeds to walk in the cabin's direction, leaving Pete alone in the desert. As he gets up, Pete turns into Fred and sees Mystery Man teleport himself from the car into the cabin's porch. He enters the cabin, causing Fred to get dressed quickly to follow him. There, Fred only finds Mystery Man while Alice is missing. He asks him about Alice's whereabouts, but Mystery Man discloses she's actually Renee. Then, he pulls out a video camera and angrily asks him who he truly is. With the presence of the camera, it's revealed that Mystery Man is the one who sent the mysterious tapes to Fred. It's a way to remind him of the crime he committed against Renee, for she's not the woman he can control. Moreover, her past doesn't sit well with him, fueling his rage. Threatened, Fred sprints away, but Mystery Man keeps on following him. Thankfully, the car eventually starts, allowing Fred to flee from him. Fred heads to Lost Highway Hotel where Renee and Mr. Eddie stay to make love. After discovering the pair has finished the deed, Fred grabs his gun and leaves his room. He visits Mr. Eddie's room and abducts him. Unbeknownst to Fred, Mystery Man is watching him inside the room he booked. A while later, Fred arrives at a secluded area in the desert and proceeds to open the car's trunk. Mr. Eddie quickly attacks him, leaving Fred helpless. At that moment, Mystery Man hands him a knife, allowing him to slit the mobster's throat. On the verge of death, Mr. Eddie asks the pair what they want, and Mystery Man simply hands him a portable video player. Through it, the mobster watches himself having an intimate moment with Renee while their associates view a disturbing adult film he produced. When the film ends, Mr. Eddie says they can be unstoppable if Mystery Man joins forces with him. However, Mystery Man simply shoots him, ending his life. Then, he whispers something inaudible to Fred's ear before disappearing. Meanwhile, in Andy's residence, the authorities are investigating his death. Strangely, the photograph Pete had seen earlier now features Renee, whereas Alice is missing. All of the detectives involved in Fred's case discover this, and Ed confirms the woman in the photo is indeed Renee. Detective Lou reveals to everyone that Pete Dayton's prints are all over the place, leading Al to voice that there's no such thing as bad coincidence. The next morning, Fred arrives at his house and uses his intercom to tell himself that Dick Laurent is dead. As he turns to leave, Detective Al and Ed appear, leading him to get inside his car to flee. Because of this, a great pursuit ensues between them. Later in the highway, Fred contemplates what has transpired. It can be implied that Pete is the ideal persona he created to escape his miserable fate. By the evening, the chase is still occurring, and Fred suddenly experiences an extreme seizure. His face begins to morph as he enters another metamorphosis.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.